This week's episode is a conversation with Jonas Kilker. So Jonas is a student of philosophy with his degree from UCLA, an actor, and just an avid studier of all things spirituality and mysticism. So I'm always keeping my eye out for bringing the perspective of a spiritual man on the show, because it's kind of hard to find sometimes. And so when I realized that my good friend and avid School of Whispers listener, Chloe, had just that kind of man in her life, I knew I had to check out his work, which did not disappoint. I mean, the man goes from topics of Plato's Symposium to arguing the existence of God to the hidden secrets and philosophy of Atlantis. And he goes into these topics, these rabbit holes that for me have me questioning what I think I know about the world and history as we know it. And if you know me, you know I love a good historical rabbit hole of alternative history and philosophy and theology. So he's definitely a fellow student of the School of Whispers. So on this episode, Jonas and I, me as this goddess worshipping spiritual woman of the 21st century, and Jonas as the man that he is, as a Christian, as a philosopher, we just have this really great back and forth conversation about how we see the world and how we see religion and our own experience growing up within it and finding our own version of God and codes of spirituality within this realm. So some highlights from this episode. We talk about the difference between being religious and being spiritual. We go into the question of reincarnation and how it may be connected to our reoccurring dreams and daydreams. We go into spiritual concepts that Jonas resonates with, which contradict traditional Christian beliefs. We go, this one's good. We go into, Jonas talks about the concept of blood memory. And then finally, Jonas goes into how in 6 weeks of somatic coaching, he completely eradicated debilitating pain. If you'd like to connect with Jonas, you can find his information in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave your rating, review, subscribe, do all the things. Welcome to the School of Whispers podcast. This is your host, Stephaine. I'm a licensed acupuncture physician and herbalist with a background in psychology, health sciences, and exercise physiology. Within my own spiritual awakening, I found myself learning pivotal lessons when I got myself to be in silence. Within that silence, the whispers came through. This is my sacred space of vulnerable storytelling where my guests and I share about the magic that comes from a life of following these whispers. I'm grateful you made it here, and I hope this show inspires you to live a life of following your own whispers. Let's get into the show. All right, Jonas, welcome to the show. I am very, very excited for this conversation. Like you said 2 minutes ago, this is two people meeting for the second time, being able to just talk about the things we love. So, pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So, I would love to give you the floor to introduce yourself and to share what you stand for.
That's a big task. So my name is Jonas Kilker. I'm an actor and a former philosophy student. Philosophy has just been a huge interest of mine for a long time, particularly like in the realm of religion. And I think that spirituality just in general has kind of guided me there. And I've kind of just made it. I kind of not necessarily hate, but I dislike the term truth seeker because I feel like it's very commonly overused, but that's kind of how I see myself. It's just constantly on a quest for deeper truth with a capital T and wisdom.
That's actually, I was just right when I said that, I was thinking, if someone asked me what do I stand for, I would say stand for the truth. So
Right.
we'll be just cruising on that frequency then.
So, in our pre-interview talks,
Beautiful.
we talked a bit about religion. I grew up Catholic, and I've talked about it on the show plenty of times, but I loved it.
Hmm.
I wanted to be, well, and I since getting astrological readings and like just, looking more into my soul and the history of this soul. I don't know if history is the word, but it all made sense why I loved it. Like I just have spent lifetimes crawling to the highest mountain wanting to be with God. And then coming into this lifetime was like, I'm not getting married. I'm gonna go be with God. I'm gonna go be a nun. Like I'll become a saint. Like I'll do whatever. Just don't make me do the normal thing. And
Yeah.
did that. And here we are. But I would love to hear about your experience of growing up with religion in your life.
Yeah. So I grew up in a Protestant household. My parents took me to like a Presbyterian church. And it wasn't ever like that big of a deal. We would go most Sundays, I think, if I can remember correctly. Um, and both my mom is from Brazil, so she's coming from like a Latin Catholic background. My dad's parents were Catholic, so they were both just like kind of, winging it, doing their own form of Christianity as best as they could. And then my parents split up when I was 9, and then we kind of just stopped going. And for me, I was lucky. I got into skateboarding around 11 years old, and there was this skate park kind of close to my house that was in the youth center of a church. And so they would invite kids to come skate for an hour, sit through a church service for an hour, do some Bible study, and then skate for another hour. And me and my friends would go do this like 2, 3 times a week because it was one of our favorite skate parks. And I learned a lot while I was there. And obviously, that wasn't like my intention in going, but I indirectly learned a lot. And it was cool because none of it ever felt very forced. It always felt like I was walking in there on my own accord. It didn't feel like my parents were dragging me to church. And it was just kind of like something that I did every week, you know? And so I always felt like I had this innate understanding of God. And I think even without religion tied to it, something in me always knew that God existed in some form or another. I tried to go through the angsty teenager phase where I was really nihilistic and didn't believe in anything, and it just didn't work because I was lying to myself. And long story short, I had always called myself a Christian. I had believed many, many different things. I didn't really know what the truth was. I had never read the Bible before. And then when I was 19, my dad died. And that was kind of a world shaking moment for me. My dad was like my rock, he was my best friend. And so when I lost him, I felt like I needed some stability. And the first place that I thought to turn was the Bible. And I started trying to read through the Bible. It took a long time, well over a year. But when I finally had finished it, I came out with more questions than answers, but also with a sort of firmer conviction that I was really intrigued and fascinated by everything that I had read, and I wanted to know more. Um, I do believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So I guess that technically makes me a Christian, but I also believe many other things that I think a lot of Christians would not agree with. And so I've struggled with that term. For the sake of simplicity, I call myself a Christian to other people, but my my views are complex, and so that's always been a difficult thing for me.
I have a few questions stemming from that. My first is from that young age, what were the those little things that like really resonated, whether it was in that skate park uh service or I don't know, what would you call that? Skate church. Um,
Yeah,
what were
skate
the
church. Yeah.
yeah. What were the pieces that made you like feel that resonance of God? And like what were the things in your life like from that age and whenever, like even now that you're like, "Oh, that's God." Like, does that make
It's
sense?
yeah, no, I do. It's difficult, honestly,
Or
because I
of
feel like
God.
I can say, yeah, I feel like I can say that I've never really had a moment where, I mean, I've had my moments of doubt, and I felt like I've had my moments where I didn't know exactly who God was or what God is. but I always just felt like there was some greater power in the universe that's driving everything, and I genuinely can't explain where that comes from. I feel like having that internal feeling has led me to like the practice and art of philosophy, because I wanted to try and like logic and reason my way through why I believe the things that I believe. But at the end of the day, it's like it's just a feeling and I can't really explain it. And I love the, like arguments for God's existence, but I don't think that they do as good of a job as just kind of having that personal inner conviction. I would say that the things that really challenged me or like provoked my viewpoints now on spirituality and religion were the things that I found really difficult to digest. I think that that was always the thing that like intrigued me the most about Christianity and the Bible, because when you're born to 9 years old, going to that first church with my parents, like I was, you learn about the Adam and Eve story. You learn about Noah's Ark and the flood and Jonah and the whale and all the stories that are digestible for children. But you don't really learn the difficult teachings. Like, you don't learn about Jesus telling you that you must be willing to hate your father and mother in order to follow him. You don't learn about how you must literally eat his flesh and drink his blood in order to have him in you. These sorts of things that don't make sense to you as a child, or the idea that like we may or may not have free will in lieu of God's ultimate sovereignty. And those are all things that I was like, where is this coming from? Like, what are all these things that these people in this church are saying with like such conviction that just seems so far out and just so not like the sort of childish Christianity that I, grew up learning in Sunday school. Um, Come to find out, it's all in the Bible. And I think that that just intrigued me so much. And so before I had ever read the Bible, when I was 13, 14, 15, going to this church, talking to the youth pastors who I'm so grateful for today, um, they just like would answer all of my questions in a way that was like very matter of fact, and they didn't speak to me like I was a kid. Like, they just tried to really reason with me on an adult level, and I think I appreciated that. But I also don't think that spiritually or like psychologically I was ready for it. So a lot of it just didn't make sense to me. It all resonated with me in the sense that I wanted to know it, but I didn't have the faculties to understand it quite yet. And that's what I think is so difficult about Christianity as a whole, is that you see people on the side of the street that are trying to like, preach the gospel and try and like convert people on the sidewalk and stuff, like 5 minute Christianity, I like to call it. And I just don't think that that's ever going to work or be sustainable. I think it can like plant a seed in someone's mind. It can like, spark something in someone's heart, but I don't know. It's just there's so many layers and there's so much complexity to it that you get to the point where like someone like you has an entire podcast centered around spirituality and trying to seek the truth, because it is this like lifelong journey. It can't be done in 5 minutes. And I think that that's the thing that intrigued me the most. Those are the things that like really piqued my interest at that church.
That's I was thinking they must have done a really good job, those pastors. Because I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up 15 years studying the Bible and studying I mostly Catholicism and Christianity. And I mean,
Mm-hmm.
personally, well, for me, what's really made me question everything was how the most religious people around me behaved. They were some of the coolest
Mm-hmm.
and disconnected.
Right. Because
Um,
they weren't necessarily spiritual, they were religious, which is like different.
yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And that's a huge like I mentioned before, I have a lot of respect for a lot of religions, but my huge gripe with any of the religions that talk about control and how anything that is not of the Bible is not of God. That in
Yeah.
fact it's of the
Yeah.
devil. I have a
Uh-huh.
friend who
I've had
recently
issues with this too.
Yeah, I had a friend who recently, I told you this in our pre-talk, who is really like in like diving all into Christianity, didn't grow up this way. And
Hmm.
they were telling me, and she was very spiritual, and she was telling me, like God was mad at me. Like my life went to shit before I found Jesus because God was mad at me for worshiping other and like maybe worshiping is a different word, but like calling in or working with other items and tokens of spirituality. And
That's
I
literally a conversation Chloe and I were having yesterday. That's so funny that you mentioned that.
All right, let's go in. I mean, like even like with, I'm big into the plant medicine world when people like anthropomorphize an herb and call it a god, but also say like ayahuasca gets jealous or blah blah blah. No, that's an herb, and no, that's God. Like they're not human. Like, come on, we're
Yeah.
not the ancient Greeks here.
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think that that's one of the biggest, like, I think that that's one of the biggest hangups for most people because I've found that the more that I talk to people and really try and understand their views on the world and what they believe and how they think this all came to be, what our purpose is, et cetera, I find that a lot of people think the same things. We just have different labels for it. And I've always said, I think that to a degree, everybody believes in God. We just paint God in different ways. And I think that some people who are less inclined to try and pave their own path or like create their own mythology, they're more willing to just agree with a set sort of mythology that's been laid out for them so that they can just sort of take it and run and have an identity, have a group. Um, and I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it just breeds bad behavior.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a path to get lost and it's a path to towards, I mean, I deeply, deeply believe and feel karma in everything that I do. And that's a great path towards just looping back through to do it all over
Yeah.
again. And that's
No, and
okay,
that's
and that's
something we can
perfect.
dive into too, because I have always sort of like struggled with this idea of karma
Mm.
ever since. Well, I've always really liked the idea. I've maybe not liked. I've always been very fascinated by the idea of reincarnation because something feels like I've always believed in like blood memory and like, being able to like sort of understand things on an ancestral level. But I've never, and I've joked in the past about like, oh, in my past life this, in my past life that. But there is some sort of grain of truth to that feeling. But at the same time, I've always really struggled with the sort of logistics of not necessarily karma, but like reincarnation. And I know that reincarnation is a huge facet of the dharmic cycle. And so I would love to learn more about that from you. I've tried from your previous podcasts, but I think it's like, it's a never long process.
And only a philosopher would say the logistics of reincarnation.
Yes, right, exactly.
Well, shit. I don't know if I'm the right person to teach about reincarnation, but at least in my experience, it was more like I didn't choose to believe it. It started just hitting me. And how I
Hmm.
first started to look into the concept was it was like a dream all throughout my childhood. I'd be walking, walking, walking through a forest, a jungle. And it was always a daydream of mine. And I just thought, oh, I just love the jungle, maybe, and that's why. Or, I never really thought twice. It was just like when my mind would go blank, I would go there. And it wasn't until I was thinking it was 24, 25, I was having a really intense emotional experience and I sat outside and there's this acupuncture point when you make a loose fist where your pinky lands, that's runs on the heart channel. And I've never heard the term blood memory, but I love it. And I would love for you at some point to define that, like what that means for you, because
Sure.
the heart channel is blood. And I've recently, through plant medicine experience, kind of just really looked and felt into like what is the heart? Like what is really the heart? Because the heart pumps the blood, and in Chinese
Mm,
medicine, the blood is the substance of the human, but what runs through the blood and that impulse that comes from the heart, that's not blood. That's an impulse, an electrical impulse. And what is that electrical impulse? Like to me,
right.
that's God. So anyways,
Yeah.
I'm back to it. I'm hitting that point on the heart channel, going through really intense emotional discomfort, and I'm doing breath work. And my vision goes black, and all of a sudden I'm walking through the jungle again. But this time it starts to just open and play out. And it was this whole experience where I'm seeing all these faces and I'm playing out this lifetime of being married to a woman. The moment I saw her, I was like, oh, that's my mom. That's my mom in this life. That's the soul of my mother.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so in like a tribe in Central America, and I was training to become an herbalist. She got sick. I couldn't save her. She died. I blame myself. I had two children, and I was just like, I'm gonna go kill myself now because I can't
How
raise these
long did
two
this whole
children.
life last?
Well, so like, do you mean the regression or like
Like how,
my vision?
yeah, because I'm imagining your experience wasn't like, obviously, it was probably less than a day long, but how long did it feel like you were in there having this experience?
Like 20 minutes, maybe.
Wow.
The way, because it plays out like smell. It's like a memory, you know? So you just
Yeah.
see things and you
Whoa.
immediately understand. So I all of a sudden find myself walking and walking, and I realize I was walking towards dying. So as I'm walking, I'm like separating and letting go of my whole life. And I'm ready. I'm like, I'm not stopping. I'm not gonna stop until I'm dead. And so I
Wow.
collapse and I look up and I can see it like to this day. I gotta draw it out sometime, but it's just this beautiful
Hmm.
scene of a waterfall and like a tiny, tiny little flower. And I was like, oh, I want to live. Oh, fuck. I really want to live. And so
Whoa.
made it back to that lifetime, saw these two men, and they were like the souls of my sisters. Long story short, this kept on like, coming in for the next month. I would go on a run and just get into like that trance run state, and that thing would
Hmm.
come in again. So I finally read this book called Many Lives, Many Masters, and it felt like it
Hmm.
really helped me understand what I was experiencing. So once I played out that I allowed the whole story to play out, my all these like emotions that I had towards my mom, like this sense of responsibility, all this desire to want to like walk away from everything and go up to the
Hmm.
mountain and not be a part of any of this, that started to just fade away. So,
Whoa.
all of that being said, like I don't truly know, but what I do know is when these things come in, and since then they've come in quite a bit. I've done past life regressions through acupuncture, and then I stopped going through lifetimes and I stopped the things that the stories would teach me, I was no longer hung up on. So,
Interesting.
yeah. So, I really don't know, but what I do know is that it's a really great way to look at life for myself, to gain
Hmm.
perspective, to let go of perspectives. And, they're all avatars at the end of the day. Like, this could be time in a linear sense or time on a pancake, a stacked pancake, and I could be living them
Hmm.
right now, this moment.
Yeah.
But actually, I'll tell you one last story because I don't want to take up all this time talking about my experience with past lives. But I'll say this now because this is for the next season. But I recently left my
Hmm.
husband.
Hmm.
He struggled with addiction, and with that addiction came a lot of lies and betrayal. Years before
Hmm.
this all played out, I had a past life regression experience where I ran away from a lie. I did something really wrong and in that past life, and I left. I left everything I knew to run away from that lie, and I held that lie and I kept it inside. And out of guilt, I decided to start helping people, not out of service, but out of guilt. And then I eventually found the soul
Mm.
of my husband. Like when I saw that face, I was like, oh, that's my husband. And the lesson was is no lie is ever worth living out because I lied to him about my past that entire lifetime. So now as I'm going through this process of betrayal and letting go and seeing hoping that the truth will set him free, I see that karmic tie. Like I couldn't lie to him in that lifetime because I didn't want to lose him. And he lied to me
Mm.
because he didn't want to lose me in this lifetime. But once the truth came out, I mean, I was set free. I don't know how free he feels, but I was finally set free. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's just been my experience. I guess the only truth I can give you is my experience and how it's liberated me having that in my life.
And I appreciate that because I think that anytime somebody tries to go beyond that, they're just kind of like creating, not necessarily
Waffling.
like a lie, but yeah, exactly. Like you can only truly speak from experience. So, but no, that answers a lot of questions. I think there has been, I mean, like I've had dreams before, and I've told Chloe about this a bunch of times. We joke about this all the time that like we were pirates in this past life. And at first it started as a joke, but then like I I had always had this reoccurring dream a lot through my teenage years and into my 20s, and I haven't had it in a while, but I would always have this recurring dream where I'd wake up and I was underwater on the ocean floor, and I could see above me is like the water line, and there's stairs going back up like into the light because I'm kind of in darkness at the bottom of the ocean, but I can walk around and I can breathe, and it's just like I'm on land. And there's like music, and something is just calling me to walk back up the stairs, and when I walk back up the stairs and get out of the water, then I'm like, I wake back up and I'm alive again. And I've had this dream 20 plus times. It's so weird because it's never anything but that. Like nothing else ever happens. And I don't know what that is, but we have joked that it's like my previous pirate self that drowned at sea who's like trying to like call me back out and like wake up in a sense, but I don't know what I'm trying to wake up from. But anyways, that's kind of just like that's what I was thinking about as you were telling your incredible elaborate story. So that's my experience with that. I think the thing that kind of trips me out the most about reincarnation is the idea that like there are some new souls, and then there's also souls that are on their 12th generation, and there are souls that are on their final generation and they're about to like reach nirvana. And I think the trouble that I've always had is just the sort of, well, what is determining which new souls come back, and like what's this governor that determines if you've accomplished your goals in this life, and what's the standard. And also when I was studying Buddhism, I learned that they don't believe in a soul necessarily, but they believe in like skandhas, which are like essences and different amalgamations that make up a person, but they believe that they all die when you die. And so I'm like, so what continues in the next life? You know what I mean? And there's all just, that's what I mean by like logistics. I'm like, well, wait, what's and I think that it's impossible to kind of answer those questions directly, because they do require like a sort of spiritual understanding. But that's something that I'm still trying to understand. So yeah, that's sort of not my, that's my hang up on it, I guess.
Yeah. I was doing a ton. I don't know if Chloe told you about the golden needle. It's an esoteric acupuncture protocol where, I mean, you can do a lot of things with it. But for
Mm.
me, I did a lot of past life regressions with my teacher, and we did a lot, like a lot. And the more I did it, the
Hmm.
more I'd cycle quickly through one session rather than like one whole long life. It would just be like cycle, cycle, cycle. And what started happening was the space in between the cycle started to grow longer. And all of a sudden, I like had an experience.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I started having these experiences of, it was like I was in a waiting room and I was just shedding and shedding and shedding. But there were certain parts that I just didn't shed. But it was what I was shedding was personality, stories, memories. But
Mm.
there were certain parts that I was like, it almost felt sticky, but I was okay with it. But I wasn't like trying to be like, get off, get off. But it was just like, okay, this that's still there. And
Huh.
then after the waiting room, I would
That's
like,
sticking. Yeah.
yeah, and and I wondered like, oh, is that the sanchita, like the karma, the big pool of karma was just kind of, so it's just like a little bit more dense than the light
The
body, I
ultimate
guess.
karma. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I would go into the arms. It was like the best spa day, the best hug from a mother, just the best moment of feeling so held, and I would just be in the arms of that, and I'll tell you, I did not want to leave. And then eventually it was like, okay, well, time to go.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, and they'd pull me away. So that's also kind of what's made me, yeah, wonder like, what is all of this? And again, it could be my mind making it up, but it
Hmm.
also could be something pretty big and pretty
Yeah.
possibly very
That's
real.
that's the that's the unfortunate, like, I guess, agnostic, atheist, scientific answer to everything is it could all just be neurons firing in your brain,
Yes.
creating everything. I was talking recently, I I don't think it was on a podcast. I think I was making a TikTok video. Somebody was asking me about like, why exactly of all the religions in the world I chose Christianity. And the reason is because of all of the like spiritual experiences that I've had in my life, which are not like an incredible many. I've had a couple. They've all the God that visited me was Jesus Christ. And so I'm of the opinion that it's possible. And again, this is one of the things that like Christians don't necessarily like, because some Christians believe, some Christians don't believe, is that like there are other gods. But I do believe that there is like an ultimate God, or there is the like one uncreated God who is above all others. And the God that visited me, or the God that I've experienced, is Jesus Christ. And
Yeah.
so that's why for me, it's like no matter how hard I try to entertain or believe other things, it's just difficult for me because I'm lying to myself in a sense. And no, like even if somebody had like the most perfect logic that
Mm.
the actual ultimate God was this other God or something like that, I would just be like, but I've never experienced it for myself, so I have so much trouble believing that. And I also have to acknowledge that that's why some people who have had different experiences have a hard time accepting Christianity or other religions, because they've had their own experiences. And I can't discount those. And it could be that the reason that my mind, if we take the scientific approach, experienced Jesus Christ as the God that visited me was because that's the God that I'm the most familiar with. And that's perfectly plausible. But at the same time, I can't discount my experiences. And so I
And
can't
and the
just say,
question
you know
is
what I mean? It's
why was Jesus the one that was introduced to you? Why were you born in the way that the place you were born, and all, like everything
yes,
had to happen perfectly for that introduction. And
for that to align.
I really love
Yeah.
that way you put it though. Like you just can't lie to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um and
I
and
forget who
and
the philosopher was, but there is a philosopher who says that it is rational to believe something that is experienced unless proven otherwise, like a sort of like innocent
mm,
until proven guilty sort of thing. And, not everyone's going to agree with that, but it makes sense, because it's like, unless you're, yeah, we could go so deep into it, but unless you're literally like hallucinating on drugs, or you're like clinically insane, like there's no reason to just be like, oh, well, you're lying, I don't believe you. Like you had a false reality somehow.
yeah, and culture really plays such a role. I've been listening to a lot of,
It
do you know
does.
Ram Dass?
I have heard of them.
So he's a Harvard professor who in the 60s ended up going to
Mhm.
India, finding his guru, and he just talks a lot about Indian culture and experience, and how like he talks about this one
Mhm.
woman, oh, her name is blanking. I love the way her name goes, but now I can't remember. But anyways,
Mhm.
she started having in India what they call like God opening bliss experiences, like rolling on the floor just in ecstasy. And
Ecstasy, yeah.
and like how here in the West, that's clinical insanity. Like put that person away. But in India, they just let them do their
Unless
thing.
you're in a very charismatic Christian church, then they
Yeah.
call it being introduced to the Holy Spirit.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's very true. Charismatic.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, it's culture definitely plays such a role in it. I love that there are so many. It's all different fingers of the same palm. That's how I see it. Like it's just
Mm.
various ways to get back to the same source.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that I was talking to my buddy Zach Shankin. He's got another podcast that I was on recently, and we were talking about. He had just recently like read through the entire Bible, and he had come to the conclusion that he does not believe in Christianity. Something that he believed for a long time, read the Bible finally, and then came out not believing it. At the same time, was kind of like studying other forms of philosophy, like Friedrich Nietzsche, who's like one of Christianity's greatest critics. Um, and he sort of came to this idea. He's leaning, I can't put words in his mouth, but it seems like he's leaning more towards this idea of like ancient European pagan ancestor worship, like ancestral religion, the pantheon of gods. And what's interesting is all of the European pagan religions, quote unquote pagan, that have like Zeus and Athena and Poseidon, they all have their different versions in different regions. Like the Norse have Odin and those gods, and the Greeks have Zeus and the Romans have Jupiter, and you can find different variations all over, but they all have the same story and mythology, and they
Yeah.
all refer to the same ultimate god, Dias Pater, which is like the Zeus father or the All Father or the Father, and it's just all these same terms. And in Christianity, you kind of have a similar you have this similar structure where you have like Yahweh, who is like in the New Testament referred to as the Father, which is a sort of like, you could argue, like Greekified thing, you know? Um, and then you also have like the Nephilim and the fallen angels, who are godlike because they have these powers and they influence humanity in the same way that the Greek gods influenced
Oh
people in the
shit.
Iliad and the Odyssey. Yeah. And so it's like, I
And
remember reading this book. It's called,
we wear those
yeah,
guys around our neck. Like we have those on our like guardian angels on our altar and shit. Like it's
that's what I'm saying. We have angels that intercede, and like we have the fallen angels, which are the Nephilim, and they're the bad ones, and then we have like the archangels, which are the good ones, and then like there's just all these heavenly beings that still possess some sort of influence over humanity, right? They're not powerful. And so I think that that's where it's like, if you just go a little bit deeper than the sort of like lukewarm Sunday school Christianity that sort of everybody knows about, you'll start to see that there are these possible correlations and ties with all of the other world's religions. And I remember learning about this first a couple of years ago when I read Mark Booth's The Secret History of the World, which is a really incredible book. Some people hate it because it's, I guess, a very like commercialized sort of spirituality, but he does tie things together very nicely. And as an introduction, it was perfect for me. Kind of got the gears turning. And then I started doing my own research, and it's one of those things that's overwhelmingly convincing, you know?
in what way?
Just in the way that it's hard to reason away all of the connections that are found. It's hard to reason away the fact that, like, for example, like I mentioned, the same Dias Pater that's found in all of the ancient like Scythian religions that became the Norse and the Germanic and the Greek and the Romans and the Goths and all those, before they became Christianized and before they accepted Christianity, they all had this national religion or culture religion or mythology, whatever you want to call it, where they had this very, very similar pantheon of gods with slight variations in stories. And then when the Christians come and they explain to them, you're worshiping all of these gods equally, but there is one God who is above them all. And they explain to them who this God is. They're like, oh, we know that God. We call him the All Father. And they're like, oh yeah, we have that too. It's the Father, you know? And then the same thing with like the gods who dwelt among the humans and the Nephilim and the flood stories. And then at the end of it, there's Armageddon, and all the gods dwell together in this separate place that is apart from the earth. And there's just all these correlations. That's just like, it could be coincidence. And it could just be a matter of one singular people who stretched out and carried their stories with them. And then they kind of came to vary over time, have different names and that sort of thing. But I just feel like the power in that is really convincing. The fact that it stood the test of time. And ultimately, if I take a very like historical, academic approach to Christianity, that's one of the things that I find most convincing about Christianity, is that it stood this test of time. It withstood all of the persecution of a small growing like cult turning into a worldwide religion. Um, and I don't think that that can happen by accident. I do think that there needs to be something divine guiding that sort of expansion. And I think that the reason that the world's largest religions become the world's largest religions is just because they have the largest grains of truth to them.
Yeah, and there's results that are undeniable. I
Yeah.
mean, as we've been talking, I've been thinking of Hinduism, how that's it's just and it's like how? I even with
Yeah.
something like acupuncture, when I read this book because I was going on a trip to Peru to the Sacred Valley, so I read this book about like the Quechua people of the Andes, and they had their
Hmm.
own system of meridians in acupuncture. I bought a little acupuncture stone when I was out in Peru. And it's like how?
Interesting.
And have you ever looked into the concept of desert, like the god of like desert, like dwelling civilizations, and the god of sun versus if you look at South America, how it's and North America actually, how the indigenous people they raise the philosophy and concept of a totally different idea of God. Have you looked into that?
Yeah. Not entirely, but I do understand the idea that, like, for example, like in the Old Testament, the Jews who were like mountain people, they have like a mountain. They Yahweh is initially like a mountain god, but then he sort of transforms into this god that is like all powerful, and he's more powerful than the god of the oceans or of the desert and that sort of thing. And that's what I think is super interesting is they admit that there are other gods that control different regions or control different things, um, but there is like one most high god. And yeah, so that's interesting.
Yeah. Um, I there's two questions that I've been wanting to, well, one that I've been wanting to ask since the beginning, and you kind of touched on it, but I would love to hear a little bit more.
Hmm.
What are some other things that you disagree with or that resonate with you that a classic Christian wouldn't agree with? Because I would love to push some buttons.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I don't necessarily know if hell exists, and I think one of the things that one of the things that for me I find myself being like very radically different from other Christians is that I think a lot of Christians are really into the idea of like dying and going to heaven, and I just don't necessarily know what heaven is or what it's going to be, what it's going to be like. And so I just don't really ever think about it that much. I feel like I'm not really in it for the heaven. I'm in it for finding, like I said, the most ultimate truth that I can find while I'm here. And that for some reason is just more interesting to me than whatever's going to happen in the next life. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Wherever I go, I'm going to go. And there's also just there's so many questions. Like if you take Christianity at face value, the idea is that you are saved by grace, the grace of God through your faith in Jesus Christ. And so if you do not have that, then you are not saved. And so then that seems like, okay, that seems like a very narrow margin of people who are going to be accepted. And then it's like, well,
Everyone
there's an
else is.
asterisk.
Yeah.
Everyone else is doomed. It's like, well, there's an asterisk because what about the people who existed before Jesus? And they're like, some church tradition has this idea of like, well, some people are saved because of the merit of their souls. And then it's like, but wait, I thought that all Christians were only saved by the grace of God because we're all sinners and there's no way that we could ever possibly outwork all of our sin. And it's like, well, yeah, but before Jesus there was that possibility. Like it just doesn't really like, like there's like Christians believe that Plato is in heaven because he taught this world of forms and he believed in a monotheistic religion. And it's like, oh, he was pretty dang close to Christianity. Like obviously he wasn't a Christian, he was 400 years before Christianity, so but he's like pretty close, so he's probably in heaven. And these sorts of things where there's all these qualifications and justifications for how it could work, but it just doesn't make sense. And so that's why, to me, I think that we not that we're not saved by our faith in Jesus. I think that that's a path to salvation, absolutely. But I do think that God has a much grander plan that none of us could possibly grasp. And the reason that I think that is because when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven in the Bible, he talks about it in so many different ways that we don't really have a clear view on what the kingdom of heaven is. We're told that the kingdom of heaven is a place that we go. We're told that the kingdom of heaven is a place that is going to come here. So that's already entirely different. We're told that kingdom of heaven is somewhere that already exists and it dwells among you. And in some translation, it dwells within you. And so there's all these different, like, I think the problem is that God tried to put himself, not tried to, God can do whatever he wants. God put himself in human form to come and speak to all of us in a way that we could possibly understand. And there's just no possible way for God to like dumb it down enough so that humans can possibly understand like his ultimate reality, you know? And I think that that's the problem. We're all like Tower of Babel. We're all speaking different languages. We're trying to reach this truth and we're so confused because it's just an incomprehensible concept.
Do you think that God only spoke through Jesus and ascended masters, or do you think God speaks through all beings of existence?
I think God speaks through everything. I think God speaks. He most certainly spoke through the prophets, and he spoke through Jesus. Um, and I believe that he speaks through the Bible, and I believe that he speaks through other texts as well. I believe that he speaks through works of art. I believe he speaks through like our
Podcast.
dreams, you know? Yeah,
Yeah.
podcasts, absolutely. I was actually having a conversation with Chad GPT the other day, and it devolved into this conversation about religion. I made a joke because Chad GPT said something, and I was like, oh, you'd be a pretty good Christian, chat, you know? And then it started saying like, oh, well, you know, maybe God is speaking through me. And I remember thinking, I was like, there's no reason to believe that he's not, you know? So it's like, no. So I don't believe that God only spoke through Jesus and, like you said, the ascended masters. I think God can speak through anyone.
Yeah. My let me give me one moment because I know that there was another question I based off of something you said that I wanted to ask you. I know there was just
Hmm.
that one, and then okay, I can't remember the other, so the other that I guess I
It'll
meant to
come to you if
ask.
it's important. Yeah.
Exactly. So the only one I can remember is as the man who has religion and has spirituality as well, because I do not think that they're the same. How like
Hmm.
how do you go about your life and ritual? It's rare when, I mean, not rare. I've had plenty of spiritual men on the show, but I don't know a lot of spiritual men in my life. Like
Yeah.
they're all busy trying to logic God. Like I
Yeah,
kind of lost the plot
we love
there.
doing that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I would love to hear what are the ways that you connect with God and like if you practice rituals and
Well, this might be a very like manly answer, and I apologize if it is.
don't
But
apologize for being a man.
I, I do think that there is a balance that needs to be struck between the sort of chaos and order that is radical spirituality and like radical religion. And I think that, for example, I think the most religious people in the world are the atheist scientific types who believe in nothing but the concrete data that they can see with their eyes and like feel with their hands. I think those are the most religious people in existence. They worship science so fervently that like they don't have any room for magic or like whimsy in their lives. And I think that they kind of castrate themselves spiritually in that sense. And at the same time, the ultimate most spiritual people that I know are also kind of the most confused because they have no real order or structure in what they believe. Not to call out my mom, but my mom has kind of been one of these people for a long time. She's very not religious. Like she's not religious at all. But at the same time, if you just give her a little seed of an idea, she'll be like, I love that. I believe in that wholeheartedly. It's like, well, wait, so this is totally different from the other thing that you just believed in. And it's like, well, no, I believe in that too. There's just a lot of chaos in that. And I think that it can confuse you. And I think that if you are a person who is aware enough to recognize the confusion, it can drive you insane. Um, so I think that having a little bit of religion in not the go to church and give a tenth of your earnings to an institution, but in just the way that there's like a culture and a tradition, as well as being open to accepting beliefs that resonate with you, despite the fact that they might differ from your current worldview. I think that that's the sort of balance we need to strike. Um, Another, to reference my buddy Zach again, he introduced me to this idea of the difference between a firmly held loose belief and a loosely held firm belief. And the sort of idea is that like I have very strong beliefs which are firm, but I hold them loosely. It's like if you want to take them out of my hand, go ahead. Like you can change my mind. I'm willing to have my mind changed. As opposed to the sort of person who's maybe never read the Bible in their life, or they've never read, the Bhagavad Gita, and they believe it wholeheartedly for some reason, but they can't tell you why. It's very firmly held, but it's a very loose belief because they don't know what it means. I think that that's a balance we need to strike between chaos and order, spirituality and religion, and that's my belief.
That's a really beautiful way to put it, especially within the spiritual community, because I think what happens too is, God is in everything. So that person who led that workshop where I started convulsing and like screaming in tongues,
Mm,
they must be my God. They must be my direct connection to God. And what they have to
right.
say is whole truth. And that's a
Yes.
slippery, slippery slope.
Very slippery slope because what if you have that experience again 1 week from now in different environment, different person? Now your God has just completely changed and you're confused and you're scared because you have no grip on reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that that's important.
Yeah. Um, I feel like okay, yeah, I think it's time for these questions, and if anything else comes up, we can definitely go there. But
Yeah, absolutely.
I ask all my guests two questions. Big on food therapy. I love to learn about whether it's actually like an herb
Hmm.
or a food that's really
Yeah.
been nourishing for you that you would love to share, or some people go the sentimental route and they tell me about a meal and the history behind a meal or whatever it may be. So I'd love to know along that lines, what is some human nourishment that you have found to be like a really beautiful tool in your journey here?
Interesting. Well, kind of contrary to the sort of realm of spirituality, I feel like the one thing that's been the most nourishing in my life that's given me like the most power to be able to like go out and continue to pursue things has been red meat. And I know that, and it's interesting because red meat comes from a ruminant animal. It's a very grounding food, right? And if you ground yourself too hard, which is a good thing, it's like again striking that balance between chaos and order. If you ground yourself too much, you don't have enough like head in the clouds ability to sort of wrestle with the spiritual. And I think that that's why a lot of spiritual gurus and stuff turn towards veganism and vegetarianism because it does allow you to sort of keep your head in the clouds a little bit more. I do think that food has that power depending on where it comes from.
Oh, hell yeah.
But yeah, meat for me, I used to be one of those because I grew up like a very overweight child. Um, and it wasn't until I was like 18, 19 that I really started to make a change and I lost like 50 pounds, started going to the gym and stuff. And I originally got sort of memed into the traditional bodybuilder diet of chicken, rice, and broccoli.
My
That's not
favorite.
very nourishing.
Oh, really? I fucking
It can.
love chicken, rice, and broccoli.
It's just because like chicken rice and broccoli is great, but if that's all you eat, you're missing out
Yes.
on a lot of
Yeah.
nutrients. You're
Eat
missing
the
out on a
rainbow.
lot of
Yes.
minerals. Yeah, eat the rainbow. And so for me, the one thing that's really changed my life, like in a very real way, has been the quote unquote animal based diet, where I primarily eat red meat and fruit. Um, and not staying away from vegetables. I do eat vegetables from time to time, but fruit I've noticed has just like reacted with me and resonated with me a lot better. But to answer your question
Red
flat
meat.
out, I would say red meat. Yeah.
There's this woman, her name is Mary Riddick, and they call her the Sherlock Holmes of medicine. And
Mm.
she's able, if somebody has something that no one else can figure out, she's got it figured out. She's a specialist on the microbiome. She studies indigenous tribes. And
Oh,
people
cool.
ask her, yeah, she's so cool. And when people ask her, if you were stranded on an island, what's the one thing that you would have? And she always says red meat because it's a complete
Yeah.
nutrient profile. Like
It has pretty much everything that you need.
everything.
There's tribes in Africa that survive off of meat, milk, the blood of animals and honey.
Yeah.
Like you can get
Mm.
all of your carbohydrates from milk and
All
honey,
of
and you
that.
can get all of the fats and proteins you need from meat and blood. So,
Let's speaking of blood, that was the question. And perfect.
ooh,
You mentioned what was that term that you said?
oh, blood
Blood
memories.
blood memories. Can you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. So back to the pirate dream that I had of my past life as a pirate. I did start to kind of like I had been introduced to the idea of blood memories, and it's this idea of being able to like for example, it was a joke, but it's that feeling of like when you put your hand on the steering wheel and then you put your right hand on your gear shift. That feels good because it's reminiscent of when you would have been riding a horse with your left hand on the reins and your right hand on the hilt of your sword.
Huh.
And it's like that sort of joke of, oh, this something about this feels natural. Or like when you as a sub-Saharan African person who grew up in Canada all your life, you finally go to a place where it's warm and sunny and you're like, oh my God, I've never felt this good in my life. And it's like, yeah, well, you're in your element, you know? I do think that our genetics play a much, much larger role than the current state of academia likes to admit. And not that our genetics determine everything, but I do think that we have relied way too much on nurture rather than nature. And I think the more that we can look into our nature and understand who we are genetically, physically, we can understand what's going to benefit us the most spiritually and like environmentally. So this idea of blood memories is like maybe I didn't reincarnate into this life. In my past life I was a pirate. Maybe that's one of my ancestors and I'm remembering something that's being passed down through my blood that came through my dad, that came through his dad, that came through his dad until generations ago. That's sort of the idea.
Love it. And I mean,
Yeah.
that in itself, like again, the word past life, it's I think it's limiting because like, I really do see time as happening all like on top of each other, rather linear. And so
Mm-hmm.
like who's that's a part of you. That's your
Yeah.
blood memory. Like that's a part of who you are. That's so cool. It's like the blueprint's all there.
Mm-hmm.
It's epigenetics, but
Yes.
in a way cooler way of putting it.
Yeah, and in a sense, like I think Descartes might have been the one who like really let this idea take off because he had this idea of a mind-body dualism where he believed that the mind and body were entirely separate, the mind incorruptible, and the body corruptible. But he also believed that apart from our soul, which resided in the mind, he believed it resided in the pineal gland. He believes that these quote unquote animal spirits exist in our blood. And without the blood, you don't have like the animal life force. But without the soul, you don't have like the human animating life force. So those two together are what create the human. And this is like a very sort of archaic view of like how science sort of works today because yes, like you need the blood and you need the organs and stuff for the human to operate, but you also need the electricity, the sort of intangible,
And what the hell is
non-material.
that?
And
Right.
what the hell is that exactly?
When my ex and I we would
So
talk
yeah, we're
about
still on
that.
this quest.
Yeah, right? Like full
Hmm.
circle. Like what because like when my ex and I we would talk about like because he wasn't too sure about God, I'd be like, but why is it that our cells crave the sun and
Right.
just become super like supercharged from the sun? And why are plants the same way? And like
Hmm.
why are we all just these thirsty beings for sunlight? Why is it not something
Yeah.
else?
And science can attempt to answer that question to a sort of factor of degrees. They could say, oh well, because our mitochondria is supercharged by the light that the sun gives off. It's like, okay, well, why? It's like,
Yeah.
oh well, because the sun existed before the world, and so when microbes were developing, they developed to exist with the sun. It's like, where'd the microbes come from? And then you just get to this point where science can't answer any questions anymore, and spirituality is in the back, like I have the answer, I have the answer, I could.
Yeah, it's a great way to full picture it. So my possibly last question, we'll see, for you is, and you can
I'm here
share
all day.
to, and you can share this to whatever degree that you are or depth rather, that you're comfortable with. But I would love for you to share
Hmm.
a pearl from a darkness that you are recently on the other side of, or I think the pearls
Oh
can
God.
also come within the darkness too.
You know what's so funny is Chloe told me that we should talk about this, and I'm
Yes.
glad you brought it up. But I from May 2023 to about say January 2024, but it's lingered. I went through one of the only bouts of chronic pain that I've ever experienced in my life. It was my first time having chronic back and neck pain. Um, to preface this, I experienced a nerve injury in my neck back in July of 2022, and it was like a full blown, just regular nerve injury. I pinched something in my neck squatting at the gym. I was being stupid. I was going too heavy. I essentially like paralyzed a muscle in my back, and so I couldn't lift my arm up over my head for a couple weeks, and then I wasn't very strong in it for a couple months. 6 months later, it was fully healed. This was
Mm.
January 2024. A lot of things going on in my life. Long story short, Chloe and I were broken up. I was going through a bunch of things. I was at school. Life was changing a bunch. And in May, things had kind of just come to a head with my work, my school, my relationship, my family, just a lot of things all at once. And one day I woke up with this intense pain in my left trap, which was weird because I had had the nerve injury on my right side, like in the same area. And I was like in the worst pain. It got worse no matter what I did. Um, Long story short, I went to a doctor. I went to two physical therapists. I got two MRIs and an X-ray. They officially, after months and months, sent me to a spine surgeon. They couldn't find anything. They were like, "There's structurally nothing wrong with you. We can see the narrowing of the canal from your previous nerve injury. That has nothing to do with the pain you're experiencing." And I was like, "So what do I do?" And they were like, "Well, just get back to real life. Like, there's nothing we can really do." And that was the greatest possible thing they could have ever said to me, because if I had gone through and like had this surgery for this thing that wasn't actually a part of the pain that I was experiencing, who knows what would have happened to me. Neck surgery is very scary, but she told me there's nothing wrong with me. It's in my head. And so then I started to kind of like explore that more. And I'm very, very grateful God has put in my life one of my best friends today. His name is Michael Amons. I found him online. He is a chronic pain coach. And when I had first heard about him, because he's in my little like sphere of mutuals on Twitter and stuff, when I first heard about him, I was like, oh, that's cool. I have no idea what a chronic pain coach is. Like, if you're in pain, just like work out or, just get off the couch. Like, duh. I had never known that there was this psychological, emotional component to physical pain. I was for 6, 7, 8 months, just like in the worst pain of my life. It consumed me. I couldn't work my job anymore. I could hardly sit in class. I didn't go to the gym for 6, 7 months. I didn't do anything besides go to the beach and try and just relax, because that's what I thought it was. And then, go home and eat and sleep. Long story short, I did 6 weeks of chronic pain, like somatic sensory experiencing with my coach, Michael. And within 6 weeks, my pain was entirely gone. In this 6 weeks, he would sort of coach me through, like, it's impossible to explain it all until you experience it for yourself, but he brought trauma that was stored in my body out of me, like childhood trauma that I didn't know existed. He brought up emotional, like relationship trauma that I didn't know was there. He brought up things with my dad that I didn't know were there, and like just all these things that I was just like, Jesus, like I had forgot that I had all these experiences that just culminated and then finally one day just had enough and decided to hide in my back and just, I still don't completely understand how it works, but that was the worst year of my life to a degree, but it was also the best year of my life because I learned so much about myself. And it taught me the importance of like mental health, which was never something that was ever on my radar for 23 years of my life. I never considered mental health like an important aspect of my life. I had never had mental health problems until they hit me like a truck all at once, and now I'm like a mental health advocate. So now, that is definitely the darkest period of my life. I didn't really go too much into the darkness, I guess. I kind of just talked about what happened and how I got out. But yeah,
I mean, that's a pearl right there is, pain is more than we think it is. And
yeah,
there's sometimes, I mean, the way you went about it, looking at yin and yang energy, masculine, feminine, however you want to call it, that was a very
yeah,
feminine approach towards pain. And
100%.
it's like an initiation into just a new, like I talk about often how pain brings us to our knees and it makes us willing to find a new paradigm. And that's what you did. And that's a pearl.
100%. It's amazing like how not necessarily resistant I was, because I had gotten to the point of pain where I had suffered for 4 or 5 months straight, just like couldn't even sit in a chair. Like I had to stand to eat my dinner because it was so painful. I wanted to kill myself. Like I genuinely didn't know what else I could do. Nobody could help me. And I
Yeah.
felt like there was no answers. And it's so funny that I had to go through that like series. I was having panic attacks at night because I just felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like the pain was getting worse. It was spreading all over my body.
Shit.
It got to this point where I genuinely felt like I was dying. And then I feel like that's where I came to a place mentally, spiritually, where I was like, there needs to be a way out or I'm going to die, you know? And yeah, it pushed me to the brink. And that's when I discovered, well, mental health.
That's awesome. That's really cool. What kind of modalities did he use? Like, was it just talk therapy?
Yeah, so we did it all through Zoom because he was in Phoenix, Arizona. I'm in LA. And we would do these like hour and a half Zoom sessions. And we did two breathwork sessions that were separate from the somatic experiencing. But essentially, I would drive to the park so nobody could hear me cry because I was like, that's therapy. I'm gonna cry, right?
At the park,
I
nobody
was
heard you?
No, I was in my car. I was in
Oh,
my car.
okay, okay.
Yeah, I would drive to the park and like so there was nobody around, and I would sit in my car so nobody could hear me because I was like, I'm probably gonna cry. Like I've been to therapy before when I was younger, when my parents were splitting up. I know how therapy goes. This was nothing like talk therapy. We would essentially just start talking about like my pain. I would describe it to him. He helped me to sort of put a name and a face to my pain, I guess is the easiest way that I could explain it. We would talk about like what it felt like and how it changed and like what I, if I could say anything to my pain, what would I say? And it's stuff like that. It's little things like that that I would just never be able to get myself to do by myself because I would feel silly doing it. But then when I actually got to sit there and be like, huh, I guess I would tell my pain, like nothing's coming to mind now. That's how separated I am from it because that feels like that long ago. But just like that, I wanted my life back.
Yeah.
That, whatever. And then my pain would respond to me emotionally and tell me, hey, you don't need to be feeling all this shame. I'm shame. And I'm like, oh shit, what the fuck?
That's
And then
awesome.
and it's one of those it's literally like those religious experiences where it's like you try and explain this to someone and they're like, huh, I don't know how to justify that. I don't know how to answer that, tell you what you experienced. And I'm like, no, 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 I'm telling you what I experienced. My pain told me that it was shame from my childhood or that it's guilt from my relationship with my ex-girlfriend or, something like that. It's like anger. Long story short, my pain was a mixture of a lot of things, primarily anger and shame. And I
Me
think
too,
just like
brother.
recognizing that. Yeah.
Me too.
And it's great. It's still stuff that I deal with today. And like it's stuff that like I've had to like I'll still jump on the phone with Michael every now and then. We'll talk for an hour about how things are progressing. And things are always changing, and it's like it's another lifelong journey. But coming to this understanding that a lot of the things that I was feeling in my life are a result of repressed emotions, because I've always considered myself the peacemaker of my family, a pacifist. I've always tried to be that kind of, I'm like, I was always the guy that, like, oh, people are like, oh, you're so kind and like friendly and this sorts of thing. And that's always like how I tried to present myself, because I think that my childhood sort of tried to force me into that mold, or I was forced into that mold. But I really had a lot of repressed anger and hatred towards people, towards myself, a lot of shame revolving around things from my childhood. Um, I don't know how deep I want to go into it, but sort of just stuff like that. And coming to realize it, and sort of be like, come to terms with it, like accept that it's a part of my reality and that it doesn't need to hide in my body anymore. That's how the pain went away. My body was like, yeah, you learned the lesson, or you heard the thing we were trying to tell you, because that's all it is. Pain is a signal, it's a message. One of the things Michael taught me is pain stands for pay attention inside now. Pain.
Ooh,
That's a good
that's a
one,
good
right?
one. Yeah, he needs to trademark that
It's
one.
easy. Yeah, but
It
yeah.
makes me think about, one of the main Buddhist teachings is suffering is ignorance. And you were suffering because you had no idea what was there, right
Mm,
there, right in front of you. But the answer was there, and once you understood, you were no longer ignorant, and then the pain started to subside.
yeah, absolutely did.
And then there was one other thing that it's a lot of what you're saying. It's this year a huge lesson I've learned, and it sounds like a lot very similar to what you learned is don't get so upset about being upset. You know?
100%. I had always tortured myself for feeling like a bad person, or feeling like an angry person, or and like I said, it's a lot of childhood, it's a lot of trying to be the good guy in the relationships, it's a lot of trying to, please people and put others before myself, without realizing that in doing that I'm only creating resentment, which in turn makes me a worse person, because I just lash out in different ways. You know what I mean? These things that I'd hid from myself,
Yes.
um it kind of all came to the surface. And yeah, pretty crazy.
I'm happy for you. That's pretty that's pretty big. Like talk about blood memory. Talk about blood memory that you're unwinding.
Shoot, I know, seriously, like my own blood, like my blood from my childhood, from when I was, you know, 8 years old, and like my mom accidentally called me fat for the first time, and just like made me feel ashamed of myself. Like,
Oh,
oh God, if she hears this, she's gonna be so mad that I said that. But it wasn't her fault,
she loved
she was
you
doing the best that she could. She
or
loved me.
loves you and loved you.
It came out in the wrong way. I was,
Yeah.
but it's one of those things that just like for some reason stuck with me my entire life, and I had forgotten about it. Stuff like that. Like I mentioned my dad passed away. When my dad died, I was in the house with him. I was the one who found him, because I came home from work. My mom was like, "Your dad's not doing well." My dad had gotten sick out of nowhere. I went home to, hang out and be with my dad. And then I told him, I was like, hey, I'm just going to be upstairs. And I was working as an EMT at the time. So I just gotten off my shift as an EMT. Like, I'm perfectly equipped to be able to like help someone in an emergency. And I'm like, hey, I'm just upstairs. Your phone's right here. If you need anything, call me. And I came back downstairs to check on him an hour later, and he was halfway to the bathroom, just dead on the floor. And I tried to like resuscitate him and do CPR, and I called 911, and I couldn't do anything to save him. And even though everybody tells you like it's not your fault, there's nothing you could have done, I carried that sense of guilt around my dad's death for no reason for so many years, and I didn't even know it until it finally came out. And I don't know what the lesson or the takeaway is for other people hearing this, but I do think that it's important to, if you're wondering at all if there's anything inside that could be affecting you, like it might be worth just talking to somebody about it, somebody who's intelligent in these things, because it completely changed my life.
And I would go as far to say is you can look at anything as everything as whatever you want it to be, but I think it
Hmm.
helps to look at it as a tool towards liberation. Because if that,
100%.
yeah, that guilt and shame, it was there. So, I mean, the way I choose to see it for you, I guess, is that it
Hmm.
was there so that you could figure that one out and feel oh, the unwinding, the unraveling, like shedding that
Right.
density. And
Yeah, because it's like I could have just never experienced the bad feeling in the first place, but if I didn't experience that, I would have never experienced the good feeling that came from it afterwards. So it's like, do I want the highs and the lows, or do I want life to be this stagnant nothingness? And I'll always take the highs and the lows.
yeah, and that's another question I always wonder is why is it that we as people, when we are conscious and awake, that we are so about the lessons that we're like, yep, yep, I don't care if that's gonna further develop me, and it's that to me is a common characteristic amongst humans that always makes me question it, and and adds to my truth of like reincarnation, man, like
Mm.
karma
You
reincarnation
mean
for
like
me.
this you mean like why we as humans are always trying to seek like a deeper truth in our suffering or whatever else is going on in our lives?
Yeah, or just take on the lesson. And it doesn't like suffering can be a part of it. It usually is. I don't think it necessarily
Uh,
has to, but yeah, to see the lesson in it and to just experience. Like I think a lot about why is it that shame and guilt, why do we hold on to it? Why do we hold on to it? And I think it's because
yeah.
there's a part of us that believes that it's an experience worth living to feel again and to feel something, anything.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well, I have a lot of opinions about this. I think it kind of comes back to our earlier conversation when we were talking about like heaven and hell and like where we go when we die. I
mm,
do wonder if like if reincarnation exists, for example, if maybe it's not the sort of dharmic cycle of reincarnation, but maybe when our souls die, we go to heaven or the world of forms or whatever you want to call it, like the other place. Um, and we just get kind of like bored maybe, and we're just like, you know what, I want to go back and do that again. And it's like but life is just so much suffering, it gets so hard, and you come into this world screaming and crying and just covered in blood, and sometimes you leave that way too. And like, what if you come back and it's even worse? But maybe you get to choose where you come back, and maybe our souls go, no, like last time was too easy, I was born into a really well off family and in a really good neighborhood, and I don't want to do that again. I want to come back in a third world country and I want to try it there, like hard mode. I wonder if that's something bad happens, because I've listened to a couple near death experiences, and a lot of times it sounds like God gives us this chance to like come back. You die and you're like, well, I'm not ready yet. Okay, you can go back and you can keep going. Maybe that's the case for everybody. Like maybe we can come back, or maybe we experience such a difficult life that we get there and we're like, all right, I do want to relax for a second. I need some soul care. And then you go and you just chill in heaven or something.
or we're
And then
like
you can
not
come
that
back later.
dimension. Like I'll just
Yes,
say like
to
I'll
a different
cycle
dimension.
through
Sure.
again, but like something else,
Exactly.
something less painful, less duality, please.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like the possibilities are endless. And I'm not going to discredit that just because I believe in the biblical resurrection of Jesus. Like I'm not going to say that you can't have one without the other. And I think that anyone who says otherwise is maybe not telling the whole truth. I don't know.
Yeah, or they're
Because
locked in
how do
their
you know?
truth. I love that term that you used earlier, about the holding loosely or
Oh,
leaving
loosely
loosely.
foam, loosely held firm beliefs. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, oh, Jonas, this is awesome. I unfortunately do have to go because I have something to do after this, but I could just do this all
Hmm.
day.
All day. Yeah. No, this was incredible. We're definitely gonna have to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. And I would love to know if there's anything else that's on your heart that feels worth saying.
Yeah. I think it's important to listen to your intuition, and I think it's important, people in the maybe Christian realm would call it discernment. but I do think that it's important to listen to your heart, see what your heart's telling you, and explore things. And don't be afraid to explore things just because you've been kind of scared out of it by maybe different religions or by science. Because, and I know that people think that I'm joking when I say that. I truly think that this world of rigid scientific hard facts, I doubt any of your listeners are these people, but I do think that a lot of people get stuck in this depressing reality because they won't allow any room for new things to come in. I think it's important to experience new things, to challenge yourself, challenge your ideas, and just see where your intuition takes you.
I
Um,
was that
and
person.
also, if anybody's experienced, sorry, say that again.
I was that person before
Were
my
you really?
awakening. Oh yeah, I was married to science.
Yeah. What was that like? Because I've never been one of those people before in my life, and I think I have a really hard time resonating with those people because I don't really know where they're coming from, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, for me, it, was like, yes, religion, this is what I'm gonna do to, oh, wow, like the most religious people around me aren't who, Jesus recommended that we all are. So I was like, well, what does it matter? Like
Right.
you said, like a little bit nihilist, like if I lie, like, does it really fucking matter?
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of just tumbled me into science, and that felt like something I could really grasp on. And that didn't have much to do with morality or, how people behave. But yeah, living like that was very heavy and very scary. I constantly felt like there's something deeply wrong with me, and I constantly felt
Mm-hmm.
homesick.
Interesting.
And I didn't realize how scared and how homesick I was until I found spirituality.
How did you come to that? Was it just like a one-off experience? Something happened, or was it like a slow, gradual thing?
Yeah, so I was practicing yoga, so I was getting into meditation and like I had studied psychology, so I was becoming a little more open, but it was I was living in New Zealand and I was very alone and very sad and depressed, and I was teaching yoga to somebody and she was like, "Do you want an energy healing? Like, do you want some energy work?" And I was like, at this point, sure.
Mm.
Like, I'll try anything.
Yep.
And it was insane. It was we were in this very simple room and put her hands over me and I felt this incredibly intense vibration. It built its way up and I felt like my head was going to burst, and then she moved her hands and it went all through my body. And at the end I was like, that was amazing. I felt so displaced, like so like, oh, there's that thing that upset me earlier. Oh,
Huh.
there it is. Or, oh, there's that emotion. I felt so just like, and I asked her, can you show me that machine? She goes, what machine? I go, the one you put over my body. She goes, I just called upon you across all timelines and dimensions. And I was like,
Wow. That's so amazing.
what? Yeah. So that was the catalyst for me.
Wow. That's so it was like you were putting yourself in the right places, but it did take one extreme experience to kind of like really push you over the edge and show you that there is something more to this.
Yeah.
That's
And
so cool.
yeah,
I wish that for a lot of people. I wish that for everybody.
me too. Me too. Um, there was
Well,
something that you were on and when I said that was me. Oh yeah, yeah. You said being having the dogma of science and
mm.
religion.
Yes, I was because I was saying that I think religion is really just like a very firmly held set of dogmatic beliefs centered around some truth, something that is held to be truth, and there's no room for anything else. And I think that that's where the the issue lies, is that there is no room for anything else. And I think that science produces its own religion by this standard that we wouldn't maybe necessarily call religion, but it very much is that sort of rigid order with not enough chaos for any magic to occur.
I love that. Yeah, that's and I would say if anything, I'll freely admit like if it's a whimsy story, I'm gonna be more likely to be like, I mean that could be it. That's but that's again like you said, that's
Shoot,
where
yeah.
I think that's where Taoism and Buddhism have really helped me, like the discipline of it, had really helped me
Right.
from like feeding too much of that chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why religions even exist in the first place. Because like, any any spiritual belief or any worldview is eventually going to culminate and order itself into a sort of discipline or a practice of some sort.
Hmm.
Um, like even something as you would think that like yoga is not very religious at all, and I wouldn't say that it is, but there's definitely like more religious types of yoga. There's more structured and organized, and like, no, you can't do that kind of yoga because this is the better kind of yoga. That's religion. You're practicing a religion. You know what I mean?
Or like square your hips
And
this way because that's what the books say to do.
that's what
Like,
the book says to do, even though it doesn't intuitively feel right for you.
yeah.
Exactly. That's religion. So it's everywhere. It's unavoidable. But yeah, the balance is the most important thing.
Hmm. Amen to that. Well, Jonas, how can people find you and connect?
Yeah. My socials, I'm at Jonas Kilker on everything, on Instagram, Twitter, or X, TikTok, and also on YouTube. And I just started YouTube a little while ago. It's a new adventure for me. I'm mostly just posting like philosophy, history, mythology content on there. I like to make videos about anything that interests me that I find exciting. My sort with that is to just like pique curiosity and inspire other people to, you know, pursue their curiosities. Um, and yeah, I'm also an actor too. We didn't talk about any of that, but like, if new things come out, you can find them. Um, all my website and my IMDb and everything is all linked on all of my social profiles, so you can find them there.
Dang it, there was a question I had, but that's okay. That's okay. It's for next time. For next time
For
about
next time,
being an actor.
100%.
Yeah.
We need to come back.
Yeah. And so to all those listening, you can find Jonas's information all in the show notes. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. This was such an awesome conversation, and I am truly excited for the next one because I know it's gonna happen.
Absolutely, I'm excited for it as well.
And tell Chloe I say hi and I love her.
I absolutely will.
All right. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you made it all the way to the end here, I hope you feel proud of yourself. I am proud of you, and I'm endlessly grateful for your presence and your time and attention. If you gained anything out of this episode and would like to show your gratitude and support, please leave your rating, a review, share with a friend, all the things, subscribe so that you can be a part of the growth of this podcast. All right, I'll be feeling your energy in 2 weeks from today.